In the 1950s, kids lost their innocence. They were liberated from their parents by well-paying jobs, cars, and lyrics and music that gave rise to a new term, the generation gap. In the 1960s, kids lost their authority. It was the decade of protest. Church, state, and parents were all called into question and found wanting. Their authority was rejected, yet nothing ever replaced it. In the 1970s, kids lost their love. It was the decade of meism, dominated by hyphenated words beginning with self, self-image, self-esteem, self-assertion. It made for a very lonely world. Kids learned everything there was to know about sex, forgot everything there was to know about real love, and few had the nerve to tell them that there was a difference. In the 1980s, kids lost their hope, stripped of innocence, authority, and love, and plagued by the horror of a nuclear nightmare. Large and growing numbers of this generation have stopped believing in the future. So 1950s, they lost their innocence. 60s, they lost their authority. 70s, they lost their love. 80s, they lost their hope. Whoever wrote it evidently pinned it towards the last of that decade. If he were writing or if she were writing and continuing on, it would read something like this. In the 1990s, they lost their power to reason. And then the next decade, in the 2000s, they lost their ability to even understand language. Where words themselves have lost their meaning and everything has become deconstructed. It was Malcolm Muggeridge writing in the 1960s who said this: "It is difficult to resist the conclusion that 20th century man has decided to abolish himself. Tired of the struggle to be himself, he has created boredom out of his own affluence, impotence out of his own erotomania, and vulnerability out of his own strength. He himself blows the trumpet that brings the walls of his own cities crashing down, until at last, having educated himself into imbecility, having drugged and polluted himself into stupefaction, he keels over a weary, battered old brontosaurus and becomes extinct." 4 decades ago, these ideational seismographers, those who were feeling the shifting foundations of ideas underneath our feet, were sensing that something radically wrong was coming into place. And here we are now, with our feet firmly planted culturally in midair. There's no solid ground, no basis for morality, no basis for language, no basis for authority. And Chesterton put it in this cryptic way. He said, the tragedy of disbelieving in God is not that a person ends up believing in nothing. Alas, it is much worse. A person may end up believing in anything. The field becomes wide open. You may end up believing anything you please.